ままもう少し歩こう肩を抱き
While I promised back in my review of Season 1 of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I would have a Season 2 review out sometime this month, plans have changed as the release has been delayed. So, as a way to make it up to you guys, I thought I would make a quick video about my favourite incarnation of the franchise, the original and infamous Yu-Gi-Oh! Otherwise known as Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a 27-episode series that was released in 1998 and produced by Toei Animation. You could view Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 as sort of an origin story to the first series that was popularised in the West in the early 2000s. While we see brief glimpses of the story in the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, Season 0 does set up the characters a little bit more. Because of this, Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 is a great starting point for someone who wants to try out Yu-Gi-Oh! Without committing to a 200-episode series. In saying that, this series is a lot different to the Yu-Gi-Oh! That most people know. Firstly, it's a lot darker and a lot more sinister in its tone. That in the card game Duel Monsters is featured to a lesser extent. Instead, the show revolves around people being shitty and everybody's favourite pharaoh challenging these shitty people to Yami games, which can vary from anything from playing your cards right on the roof to extreme yo-yos. The point of these games is to reveal the nature of the player's hearts. Upon either losing or cheating at the game, the participant is put through a penalty or punishment game that is watered down from the manga, but are still pretty messed up if you ask me. The show is rather formulaic with its episode structure, but regardless of that, I find it to be much more interesting than most of the arcs in Duel Monsters. And the characters are portrayed pretty differently in this show too, both in their characteristics and design. Look at those orange uniforms and that green hair. Joey and Tristan... oh, sorry. Jinochi and Honda get a little bit of backstory, I suppose, to those flashbacks that we see in the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. They go from being the bullies of Yugi to being his very best friends rather quickly. And Yugi is much more naive in this series, to the point of it being almost frustrating. But because he's so naive and innocent and he sees the best in everyone, the juxtaposition between Yugi and Yami Yugi is incredible and one of my favourite parts of the show. Like I will say over and over again, Yami Yugi is much more sinister in this series and Yugi still has yet to develop at all. The portrayal of Yami Yugi is much better in Season 0 as he seems so much more threatening than this bringer of justice that we see in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. There is nothing noble about him. For all intents and purposes, he is just protecting his host at this point in the story because the two really don't form any kind of bond. Like I mentioned, this series is my favourite of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, and it's kind of nice to see these characters that I know from my childhood in more interesting ways than what was shown on TV in the West. If you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially Duel Monsters, I do recommend giving this a go if you have yet to see it, and if you're looking for a starting point, like I said, without much commitment, if you're not too keen on the idea of starting something so large, this is perfect.